Good morning. Welcome to Kunzang Payo Choling. We're thrilled to have a teaching by Jetsunma Ahkon Lhamo today for you. Today's teaching comes from 1990, and it is entitled, It's Obvious We Are in Samsara. For those of you who are not familiar with that name, Samsara is a Buddhist word that means the era of death and rebirth, basically. We are in a cycle of living, and she'll explain more, so enjoy.
Most of the real choices that we make as to how we should live our lives and how we should conduct ourselves are based on the phenomena that we have seen, that we have a very steadfast and very hearty belief in. And the things that we have seen, according to the Buddhist teachings, are actually very misleading, in that we have seen cause and effect relationships, but we have seen only partial ripenings of cause and effect relationships. We don't have the omniscience to see all the conditions that occur due to certain causes coming to fruition. Neither do we have the omniscience to see the ripening of causes that were begun previous to this incarnation. So we have a very partial, very incomplete view of what is real and what is not real. In fact, what is happening and what is not happening. These things are hidden from us. So we must take these things into consideration. When it comes to our decision as to how much time to put into our practice and how much of a commitment to make during the course of our lives to our practice, most of us will say, well, yes, I do want to practice Dharma, but I have to live. I have to raise my family. I have to go to work, and I have to do what other people do in my society. And of course, there's something to that. We can't simply hole up in a cave somewhere at this point. We do have to get along. But for a good portion of the time, the decisions that we make are based on the facts that we think we have seen, and we think that we have seen them truly and completely. So hearing a different perspective, hearing what I have just said to the children, that there are those who have seen these miraculous events, and who, having seen them, were so greatly influenced that they were willing to drop many of the things that others consider important in their lives and go for the goal, because the goal had become to them so real. Because we have not had that view and therefore don't have this tremendous opportunity to make that choice easily, does not mean that we can't think and understand that these things have happened, that the stories in our lineage alone teach us that there have been many lamas and their students who have attained great levels of realization, not just 1 or 2 or 10, but many. And so this isn't inconceivable that we ourselves can achieve realization. Certainly it is a worthy goal. Now, for today's teaching, I'm going to spend some time pointing out the blatantly obvious. And sometimes when I do this again and again and again, my son accuses me of teaching as a representative of the Department of Redundancy Department. Department of Redundancy Department. That's all right, you can laugh. And there's some truth to that. But the fact of the matter is that we simply do not register the blatantly obvious. Sometimes the obvious becomes so much a part of the fabric of our lives that we can't pull it out. We can't recognize it. We cannot determine for ourselves what is actually going on. One very obvious point that I would like to point out is that we are already involved in samsaric existence. Anyone in this room, if they give that an entire 30 seconds of thought, could understand for themselves that this is so, once we define samsaric existence. Samsaric existence is that realm of activity that is brought about by cause and effect relationships based on the belief in self-nature as being inherently real. Its characteristics are cyclic birth and death, and rebirth and death, and rebirth and death. It is cyclic. This samsaric realm has a cause. The cause, again, is the belief in self-nature as being inherently real, and therefore the desire that arises from that belief. To recapitulate teachings that I've given before, once one understands or believes or has the view that self-nature is solid and inherently real, that is to say, really solid and undeniably real, that one believes the ego or self-nature to be a true basis and something upon which one should base one's perception and one's facts, then perception, that assumption actually does give way to perception, certain kinds of perception. That is to say, that once one assumes self-nature to be inherently real, one must continuously and constantly go through the process of determining the distinction between self and other. One must determine the distinction between self and other, and one must do so in order to continuously define the limitations and the properties of self-nature. The assumption of self-nature is there. It must therefore be continuously defined. In order to do that, then, other must also be continuously defined. In the process of continuously viewing self-nature as being inherently real, distinguishing between self and other, and defining other as well as self-nature, a process naturally occurs which results in attraction, repulsion, or neutrality. In order to determine other as distinct from self, in order to determine the properties of other, one must begin to decide how other is different from self, how other is different from self, how relativity actually occurs. And in that process, one automatically begins to have a response. Response is simply automatic. Response occurs continuously and actually compulsively in the need to determine the reality and properties of self-nature and as other, distinguishable from self-nature. Reaction must take place. We in this room have never had an experience that does not have as its basis reaction. Never. Even though we would like to think so. We would like to think that we've had certain meditation experiences. We would like to think that we have the quality in our minds that we could simply have a very relaxed experience without having a reaction to that experience. Still, I must tell you that as long as we are samsaric beings, as long as we are involved in the realm of death and rebirth, we in fact do react and continuously react and have always had reactive experiences. If you do not know this to be true for yourself, this is something that you can test very easily. You can walk into a room with your eyes closed and then open your eyes. That's all you have to do. And if you are honest and courageous enough to really determine what is happening within your brain, and actually sensitive enough, able enough, you will see that a panorama of things register: color, size, smell, sense, feeling, gradually the number of objects, the placement of objects, many different things register with you, and they actually register one by one, although they may seem to make an impression that occurs simultaneously. The brain works very, very quickly, and they actually register one by one. Each one of those things causes a reaction in us. It is impossible for us to see a color or shape or size or person without determining some sort of reaction to that. If that isn't clear, another thing that you might do is to close your eyes and have a person that you've never seen before walk into the room. And then open your eyes and look at that person. Many different things will happen, and they will happen very quickly. You will notice what the person's wearing, the color of the hair, the size of the person, the condition of the person. According to that person's look, you will be able to tell something of how they live. You will absolutely have a different impression from a street person than you will from an executive person, if their look is true to their lifestyle. And you will not be able to prevent yourself from having that very kind of reaction. So this is a good test to actually put ourselves through, in that we can learn something of our perception. But having had that perception, we are engaged actually in a process that is a continual process with us, and we are actually, and unfortunately, caught up in that process of attraction, repulsion, and neutrality. Each of these reactions occurs due to the arising of desire within our mind streams. Again, desire arises because of the belief in self-nature is inherently real, and because of the perception of the distinction between self and other. In our reaction process toward objects, toward all phenomena, desire arises. And it's difficult to determine what comes first, the chicken or the egg. Actually, in our belief in self-nature as being inherently real, there comes quite naturally a need to continue that continuum of self-nature. And that, in a sense, is the mother of all desire phenomena. There is an ego clinging, and that once one determines the solidity of self-nature, one must continue that solidity, because the belief is that that is one's true nature. Even when we come to the point that we take Dharma teaching, that we begin to receive the teachings, and we understand that that is not our true nature, that in fact our true nature is the inherent Buddha nature, that the primordial wisdom state, which is luminous and spacious and innately wakeful, and has a non-distinguishing awareness, that, or rather I should say non-specific awareness, that nature is in fact our nature. Even when we hear that with our minds, our faith, because of what we have seen since time out of mind, is in the continuum of self-nature. Therefore, it is only the greatest yogis who have the highest realization, who, knowing the moment of their death is at hand, and seeing the moment of their death very clearly, can abandon all gladly and move from the perception of self-nature or confusion, from ignorance, into the realm of bliss due to their cessation of all ego clinging. Sentient beings that are ordinary and have the fearfulness associated with the need to continue the continuum, instead cling to self-nature and are fearful and have difficult experiences at the time of their death. So there is a difference in the way that we experience. Back to pointing out the obvious, that we are involved in cyclic existence. We know that this is true. We realize that we are involved in cyclic existence. Theoretically, we can understand that this is the case, and yet our difficulty is that we cannot realize the truth of that to the degree that we understand the need to abandon that belief. The fine line here is very hard to distinguish, very difficult to understand. It is possible to have a theory or an understanding, a theoretical understanding that is quite elevated and quite clear, an intellectual understanding, and yet within the context of our lives to continuously and obviously grasp onto phenomena. Do you think that that's true? It must be true. Look in the mirror and see how you live. All of you. See how I live. How do we respond? What do we do when we're in trouble? What do we do when we are feeling lonely? For instance, when we are feeling lonely, we try to be with someone, we try to have friends, or we try to communicate our loneliness in some way as to relieve that suffering. We rarely look at the causes of that loneliness and try to solve the problem in a deeper way. For instance, according to the Buddhist teaching, the cause of loneliness would be a lack of generosity or kindness or concern in the past. And that would probably be in some previous incarnation. So when we see our loneliness, we do not immediately go out and try to deepen our hearts with concern for other sentient beings. We do not automatically go out and try to recognize that there are places in our life where there could be generosity, where there could be compassion, where there could be activity that serves to benefit other sentient beings. Instead, we wish to speak of our loneliness, or we wish to try to get away from our loneliness. We try to escape it. That's just a small example, but I think it's an example that each of us can relate to. Not all of us are sick, not all of us are poor, but we can all relate to having been lonely at one time or another. Each one of us has had that feeling. So let's use that as our example. Knowing that we react toward loneliness in these usual ways, if we probe deeper, we'll see that that reaction teaches us something about ourselves. What we learn about ourselves from that is that we do not understand the deluded response that we are not now having. We do not understand the properties of samsara. Let me explain. The properties of samsara are this. Everything in samsara arises from a cause. The cause brings about an effect. The effect is an effect, but also serves as another cause. That cause brings about further effect. Again, that effect acts as an effect, but also acts as a further cause. This process continues and is called interdependent origination. Samsara is based on that phenomena, and it is all pervasive. There is not one single occurrence within the context of samsara that does not arise from a cause. If we look to the original cause, if we can try to imagine what that is, according to the Buddhist teaching, and the Buddha is one who has the ability to see to the beginning of all cause and effect relationships, and to the fruition of all cause and effect relationships, while we cannot, having only at the outside 80 years experience. The teaching is that the original cause of samsaric experience, the original cause, is the assumption of self-nature. That is the cause of all additionally arising phenomena that continues to create cause and effect, cause and effect, cause and effect. But we never look to that. We never, in our lives, in our ordinary lives, try to engage in solving our problems or even just continuing with that idea in mind. We constantly base our next activity on what we see to be true or assume to be true through our understanding of cause and effect relationships. Yet we do not have the whole picture. According to the Buddhist teaching, since we do not have the whole picture and we don't understand the original cause, since we don't even understand the causes that have come along since that time, since we do not even understand what the causes that we incur right now will bring about in the future, the probable realities that they will bring about in the future, since we understand none of those things, we are very unclear. And this perception that we have is called confused and deluded. According to the teachings, we continue to revolve, or actually it is said to wander aimlessly in samsaric existence as though we were in a fog, simply because we don't get the facts. We just don't get the facts. It's a little bit like trying to make it through a forest with a mist so thick that we cannot see the trees. Our confusion is such because we don't have the facts. If we could really understand that to the depth of our being, wouldn't it really change us? Wouldn't it change our mode of operation? Wouldn't it finally convince us to stop trying to satisfy ourselves in the ways that we do, completely incompetent as we are in those ways? Think about how we try to satisfy ourselves. We try to satisfy ourselves by reacting. And according to our reaction, we continue, and what we do next is react again. And according to that reaction, we react. And we continue in that reaction. And that's what we do. Every single one of our experiences is in fact an extension of some response, some reaction to some catalyst that is not clear, due to the fact that we have probably contrived it within our own minds as a reaction to something else. Haven't you ever seen that happen in a very real way in your life? Haven't you seen, perhaps in a very ordinary way, that you find yourself up in arms about a certain situation, completely reactive, off on a tangent, and then you come to find out that the facts that you are responding to were completely distorted, that someone told them to you wrong, or you saw them wrong. They were based on deluded perception, and the entire scenario that you might have spent a full week creating is just a puffball. Well, guess what? The good news is that you figured that one out. The bad news is that you haven't figured the rest of them out, and that's all we've ever been doing. Because the basic assumption is wrong. Self-nature is not inherently solid. We have never, due to our fixation on self-nature, ever tasted the primordial wisdom nature, which requires an absence of fixation in order to taste, which requires an absence of artificial construction in order to view. We have never tasted our own primordial wisdom, spacious nature. which by definition is free of such fixation and contrivance. Therefore, every assumption that we have made and every conclusion that we have drawn from it is incorrect. Hearing that is a shocking thing. It almost has an adverse effect in that it sort of makes us want to say, well, at some point you have to live your life. It almost makes us want to say that. But you see, the point that the Buddha makes about all of this is that that's what you have been doing all this time. Living your life as you see it. And haven't you done a terrific job? Because from the Buddha's point of view, look what it's gotten you. You're still in samsara. You're going to die. You're going to be reborn. No one knows where. You're going to continue in confusion based on false assumption. You're going to be prey to the temporary happinesses and the sadness of that temporariness and the suffering of cyclic existence. You're going to have to work very hard at trying to create just moments of happiness, and those moments of happiness will be temporary. You're doing a swell job. Why change now? According to the Buddha's teaching, then, we have to examine the faith that we have in this temporary cyclic existence. And we have to make some other kind of determination. We don't have to work at being involved in cyclic existence. We are already involved in cyclic existence. Another obvious fact. Yet it's something we don't get because we continue to work very hard at being involved in cyclic existence. What we don't put much effort into is the precious awakening that we call enlightenment. The pacification of all hatred, greed, and ignorance that arises within the mind stream due to the reaction, due to the belief in self-nature as being inherently real. We put very little real, actual effort into that. Yet we are not now enlightened. And not being enlightened, we must put forth some effort into attaining that state. The first effort has to be in determining the false of cyclic existence and the obvious then value of enlightenment. If cyclic existence arises from a cause, and that cause is desire and the belief in self-nature as being inherently real, or that primary assumption, then what is the cause of enlightenment? The cause of enlightenment is quite different, actually. The cause of enlightenment is the inherent Buddha nature. Within us, each one of us, as our true nature, has that Buddha seed, that seed of enlightenment, that inherent potential that is the nature. That inherent potential cannot be looked at as an object or a seed that is solid, else we would be making the same mistake that we make when we believe in self-nature. That inherent nature has to be understood as the union of spaciousness, space, and discriminating wisdom. This is very important to remember. It must be understood as the union of space and discriminating wisdom. Understanding that, one must understand the emptiness of the primordial wisdom state, in that it is not an object, not a thing, cannot be moved toward, it cannot be entered into, It cannot be united with. It is in its nature emptiness. Yet it is the union of space and discriminating wisdom. It is innately wakeful. Discriminating wisdom is that, while it does not cling in some specific objective way, it has as its rich potential discrimination. We, however, do not experience that nature because of our fixation to and clinging within samsaric existence. Therefore, we cannot abide spontaneously in the natural state with pure view. We cannot taste. Understanding that we are already in samsaric existence and need put no effort into maintaining that it by its very nature, due to its inherent tendency to continue itself through cause and effect relationships and through our fixation on those cause and effect relationships, we decide then instead to remove our fixation on this continuum and study in order to determine, practice in order to determine, and live in order to determine a method by which we can view the natural state. Remember that the point here is that the cause of cyclic existence is ego clinging. The cause of Buddhahood is Buddha nature. We have as our nature that seed, this inherent potential, which is the very union of space and discriminating wisdom. Inherently, in the natural state, our view is spacious, uncontrived, luminous, innately wakeful. There is nowhere to go that creates such a state. Neither can we dispel it. It is the nature. However, what we must begin to do is to pacify the causes that continue the continuum of samsara. Hatred, greed, and ignorance. The fixation on self-nature is inherently real. Through study, through contemplation, through compassionate activity, through meditation, through prayer, through offering, through these practices, one begins to purify and give oneself the antidote to ego clinging. And so these practices must be begun now. You need not say to yourself, well, at some point I have to live because this is my life. You will do that. If only it were that easy. If only you had a choice. If only you could say, well, I think I'll choose to be a Buddha. But it's not that easy. Please study the obvious. We are living in samsaric existence. That is the reality that we experience. Due to the compulsion and fixation that we experience, and all of the cause and effect relationships that we have been continuing and view as our continuum since time out of mind, that is what we experience now. It's taking care of itself. What we have to enact are those antidotes, those causes which dispel delusion. The natural cause, the natural antidote to the belief in self-nature, that nature as being inherently real, is compassion. Compassion to the degree that we understand that all sentient beings are equal, that they are in their nature the Lord, the inherent Buddha nature. Understanding that, look how many more of you there are in this room than there are of me. Therefore, it's only logical to make the decision that you are more important than I am. It's not like I'm such a great girl. It's logical. But that kind of compassionate activity that comes from that belief is the very antidote to ego clinging. What is the antidote to desire? One can think of compassion as the antidote to desire. That certainly is true, to think of others' well-being before one's own. But there's another antidote, and the antidote can be thought of as wisdom. In order to dispel desire, one should understand the nature of phenomena. What is this stuff we're so crazy about? If we examine this for ourselves, we can understand the very fabric of this continuum and wonder why we continue in such a deluded state. That contemplation, that wondering, is the foundation for wisdom. Hatred. This is another thing that must be pacified, and we have it within our mind stream. We're so angry. We're so determined to blame. We're so determined to be right. The basis of that is nothing other than hatred. How can we consider the antidote to hatred? Equanimity. To understand that the basis of all phenomena is the empty nature, that all things arise from the great womb of emptiness. To understand that all sentient beings are equal and that their nature is the Buddha. That there is essentially nothing, no thing to fight against, and nothing, no thing to be right about, and nothing, no thing to expect, and no one who is separate from one's own nature. To study in this way is the beginning of awakening. These are the steps that we must take. We are already taking the steps that cause us to remain in delusion. These things we needn't take any further or become better at, more competent and more proficient. We're very good at that. Instead, we should try something new. Determining the faults of cyclic existence, we must determine the value of the precious awakened state. Enlightenment, or the precious awakened state, the state of Buddhahood, is the only true cessation of suffering. It is the cessation of suffering. Because it does not have the components of suffering, the necessary cause and effect relationships that continue the continuum of suffering. For that reason, Buddhahood must be embraced for oneself and for the sake of all sentient beings equally. This is the determination that one must make, and one must make it faithfully from the heart. And in order to do that, one must take advice from the Department of Redundancy Department and clearly understand that we do not yet understand the obvious. If we knew how to create happiness permanently, we would do so. There is no permanent happiness in cyclic existence because cyclic existence has as its basis impermanence and change. What we must move toward is liberation, the awakening to our primordial wisdom nature, that pure, spacious luminosity that is Buddhahood. Thank you very much for coming today.
Yahweh
Thank you so much for coming today, and hope you enjoyed the teaching by Jetsunma. Jetsunma has left a legacy here at KPC that is really unbelievable. We have soap practices every day. We have offering, things that you can do, activities that you can do that will bring about merit, that will bring you closer to enlightenment, along with basically, online teachings and in-person teachings by both Jetsunma from the past primarily right now, and Khenpo Tenzin Karze is one of our current teachers, as well as Atira Zeoli, who is subbing right now for Khenpo Karze on Sundays. Khenpo has been teaching us meditation series with a lot of the traditional linear teachings that bring about why you would do this. And Atira has jumped in, and she is using it as a 6-week course in Tonglen, which is the practice of sending and receiving. And it's a perfect practice for these times. It helps antidote, a lot of suffering, and it, sort of unites us all as human beings. And so give it a whack. It's available on Zoom, on Facebook, and on YouTube, and on some other platforms, I think, like, let me see. Go check. I'm going to say that because I'm older and I don't go on everything. So here we are. Hope you enjoy it. And that starts that her teaching will be today, starting in about 45 minutes. So 11:30 is the time here on the East Coast. And so pick your location. You can go to our calendar on tara.org, TARA. Just scroll down on the homepage to the bottom, where it gives you a link to the calendar, and you can click and find, whatever you need. Hope you enjoy, not just today, but every day. If you're in the area, please come and visit. Inside Prayer Room is open 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., and the outside parks and that sort of thing are open. Parks and gardens, I guess, are open dawn to dusk. Please come. We'd love to see you. We'd love to spend time with you. So thank you, and see you soon.